Welcome to the Best Place to Work podcast, where we promise actionable tips from real business leaders on building amazing work cultures. Not tips from Google, but tips from the trenches of real-world businesses just like yours. On this episode, we talk core values with Roy Chomko. How do you draft them? Do they matter? How the heck do you start drafting them if you don't have any? He talked about how they didn't have any stated core values and drafted them after being in business for a few years, and then what that actually meant for his business. So listen in. Well, today I'm here with Roy Chomko, who's the founder and president of Adage Technologies in Chicago. Adage is an international e-commerce and web development firm that has been on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies, and as well as the Illinois Best Places to Work 6 times in a row. Is that right, Roy?
That's right.
Okay. Wow, that's quite an accomplishment. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So you guys. Sounds like you guys are quite the company. You guys started in like 2001. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And how many people do you guys have total?
Right now we have about 55 people.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about how the company got started and why, and how you guys got to where you're at today.
So the company started again in 2001. We started with the intent of building web applications. We wanted to build software in a web format, and at the time, there was a lot of opportunity to do that. What ended up happening was in websites and e-commerce, they became eventually much more complicated with the advent of content management systems and e-commerce platforms that just became much more like software products that had to be integrated around. So that has been the direction we've taken more recently, I'd say in the last 5 years, moving away from sort of custom app development into the web space. I mean, everything we do involves some sort of custom development aspect to it and programming. But we found ourselves more in the e-commerce and web space.
Okay. So it was like you and a couple people that started doing like consulting, or how did you grow that?
Yeah, so it was myself and my business partner, as well as we had 2 employees that started out. And, it took us a while to get our feet on the ground. I mean, I think in the first 5 years, I was surprised. I looked back recently, and we had 5 employees in our first 5 years for the most part. It was interesting. I didn't realize it happened that way. and then in the next 5 years, so if we take them in sort of 5-year increments, we had then grown from 5 to about 20 people. And then in the following 5 years, we grew from 20 to about 55 people where we are today. So it was interesting. I didn't realize it took that long.
That's funny. Now this isn't your first venture. I mean, I know you have a diverse background being with GE and a couple other stints. So did you come into Adage like having formed other companies? Tell me about, where you started from in terms of building teams, building companies, and what you brought to the table.
Sure. So like I think any good entrepreneur, you always have a couple things that don't quite work out how you think they should start out and work out. So my first venture was more of a Cisco VAR. So I was in sales, and you pointed that out. I had been in a sales capacity for some system integrators in my early career, as well as a software company. Had the opportunity to start a company and become a Cisco VAR. So we sold a lot of Cisco gear, wide area networks, local area networks. And had some success for about 1.5 years, but decided that it was time to move on. And so we did. And this was right around 99, 2000. And I got involved with some guys that were doing some web development stuff. Again, very similar to the type of business we do today. And that lasted about 1.5 years to 2 years until the .bomb hit. And I think that's pretty much when all of us scattered into different things. It was pretty common. I mean, there's a lot of, we were tied up in some, more, internet-based projects, and that just didn't quite work out. So with that, started Adage Technologies and moved on to where we are today.
Awesome. So coming to today, you guys are now a multi-year award winner for Best Place to Work. I know you guys also it was like Chicago 101's Best Places to Work award winner. What would you say are the key things that you do, or, would you attribute to that, like building that culture? I know you list several things on your website, but, what would you say are some of the top 3 things that attribute that?
I tell people it took us a while to figure this out. I think one thing that we really hold like we have like five core values that we've just finally figured out what they are, and this gets some questions I think that we can get to later, but pointing out the fact that it took us a while to really document what our core values are and things, but I think we've always known what they are intrinsically. We just didn't identify them, and a lot of it comes down to integrity and success and delivering success for our clients and being really invested in their success. So those are our core values, and I think identifying those primarily as drivers for what we and how we act helps to infect the rest of the company in terms of how our employees look at things. So there's decisions every day you have to make, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the important thing, is holding true to those core values, and I'll probably talk about that. I'll mention it 5 more times probably before we get done with this interview.
So you hear the core values, though. I mean, that's if you're being cynical and someone's saying, "Oh, that's great," core values. Like, would you say that that's something that you said you drafted them later, but you kind of always knew what they were? Tell me about that. Like, do you feel like you had alignment with your early founders, early partners, and you just didn't articulate it, or tell me about that process of drafting your core values, because I think that's something hard for most businesses. They don't have them, and then they just kind of come up with things that sound good, as opposed to what actually are driving change.
Yeah, that's a good question, because when we first started out, again, we didn't really know what they were. But I think as we got into situations, and maybe this takes a couple years to work out, but as we got into situations, we found that we agreed on how to deal with them. Right? There's always gray lines in terms of when you're doing business with people. It's not black and white. I wish it was that simple, but it's just not. There are certain circumstances, whether it be employee-related matters or customer-related matters. You have to make decisions, and you have to make sure that you're on the same page. So I think as we work through those, I think they kind of define themselves eventually over time, and that allowed us later to say, okay, yeah, this is really what we're about. And again, I'll get back to, for us, it was integrity. Like, one thing we always want to do is just want to be as transparent and 100%, have that 100% integrity with our customers and our employees. We felt like if there was just no way to get beyond the dishonesty point. If you go down that route, we don't want to deal with you, both as an employee or a customer. So, and then the other part of it is that if we're not delivering success to people, we're not helping them, right? So why are we in business? So I think that's the second component of it for us, that we kind of like you said, we didn't write it down day one. I think we figured it out over time, and then we were able to say, okay, this is what we're about.
So integrity is self-explanatory, but when you say success, I can see what you mean with success with your clients. Does that also something like success for your employees, like making them successful? Does that kind of parlay into like career planning, or understanding like how they can move up in the organization? I mean, does that tie into that as well?
Yeah, it does. In fact, what I try to tell people is that in today's day and age, I don't expect people to be, company lifers. I mean, there are people that we have that are on staff that have been with us for a long time, but you should go into every employment opportunity just assuming that you want to make the most of it, and be successful in everything you do, so that you do have choices and options. If you aren't going to stay with us, at least grow yourself, because and figure out how to measure that and what your goals are, so that you're advancing your career and you're not just an employee, right? And if you do that, we're going to find opportunities for you, and we should grow as a company as well, so that we can grow together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So tell me about, I mean, I know you guys mentioned, I think on your website, you started like a culture committee with a rotating group of employees. I'm going to play the cynic here, and I think of like The Office, like a party planning committee. How is that different, and how do you structure something like that to really make it meaningful? Because I think some businesses might say, "Oh, we need a culture committee," but they don't really know how to do that. What would you say is an aspect of making that successful?
So there has been some challenges with it. I can tell you that. I won't go into the details, but and there is cynicism around it, aside from just being a party planning committee type thing. So what we try to do is we do an annual survey. So that's part of some of the things we do to understand where we sit with our current employees, and we measure that. We have metrics that we measure to see whether we're going up and down in certain categories. And through the years, we've tried to keep it as consistent as possible in terms of the questions, so that the measurements are valid. So what we'll do from those is we realize that some of the things that come through on that, and we'll take the three lowest scores and we'll try to attack those. And of those three, sometimes the culture committee can't help in that, but we try to select one or two things where they can provide us advice and feedback and give us perhaps even some suggestions on how to tackle those issues that have been brought up and how we can improve better. So that's how we've been using it, and so when they meet, they talk about how they can possibly improve on that. They also do, by the way, plan parties and have comments on that. So I won't deny that, but we do try to give them a higher level task in terms of figuring out how we can make Adage a better place to work. And if there's other ideas that come out of that, then we do solicit those and we listen to them as well and figure out how we can incorporate it into the company, whatever we're doing, whether it be HR related or other aspects of policy, that type of thing.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like it's all about feedback and soliciting that from your team. You said you do an annual survey. Is that right? Do you do any other surveys or anything associated with that?
Yeah, so we do the annual survey with the employees. There's of course the external ones because of the different awards they are taking those. So we do look at that feedback as well. The other thing we do is what we call a heartbeat score, and we do this with our customers as well. So it's just a real quick, like, couple questions, like boom, boom, boom. Hey, what do you think of these things, and how are we ranking? And we do that quarterly, so that we're measuring quarterly how we're standing with the employees as well, but without getting into too much detail, because otherwise we'll never get any work done. So.
Right. You get too wrapped up in that.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Constantly surveying people, and no one takes too many surveys, right?
Right. And then you're not really actually acting on them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Tell me about how the culture of the business has changed over the years. Obviously, going from 5 to 55 is a huge jump, but how, explain to me how, like, your outlook and philosophies have changed from, maybe going from just 5 people in a room to 55. And I guess speaking to someone that maybe is in your same spot, maybe they're at, the 25 mark and they're on their way to 50. What are the things you learned along the way that you would say?
Yeah, well, like we talked about earlier, I think part of it is like you start out, you're just looking to survive. You come into situations, you try to make some decisions on what you're going to do in cases that, again, are never black and white. I wish they were. So I don't I don't think the culture changed dramatically. I think, again, I'll go back to, I wish we would just sat down and defined it probably sooner. Only in the last 4 to 5 years did we sit down and say, oh, hey, these are what our core values are, and now we're going to try and we're going to live by them, type thing, and let everyone know what they are. So that would be if I was in the 20-person phase again, I would say sit down, figure out what you believe your top core values, and they shouldn't be 10, it shouldn't be 7, it should be less than 5. We have 5, so I even struggled to try and get it down. I would like to have been lower, but that's what we landed on, and it worked out. I mean, you define them, write them down, then live them, share them, and make sure that you're making decisions based on those. And the last part is hiring and firing based on them as well.
Yeah, that's a good segue into the hiring section. I think you mentioned somewhere I read about, hiring is basically the biggest aspect of your business. It's the biggest aspect of most people's business, the people that they bring on. Do you guys do anything special in your hiring process in terms of people involved in the interview, any testing, or what do you do there?
Yeah, so we're a technology company. So our process starts out with basically an HR interview. So the HR or recruiter are doing the initial interview, really making sure that someone shows up on time. They present themselves well. They can communicate at an appropriate level for the position that they're going to be in. And it's really just a check down on some basic things and making sure that we're asking some consistent questions, understanding that they're a good fit for their role, and more of a screen for then a manager of that department. So then whatever role is being hired, the manager will then take the next interview. Sometimes, depending on what it is, we may have them do a code review. So let's say it's a developer or anything technical. They'll have to pass a relatively straightforward online test, which surprisingly some people can't finish based on what they're applying for, which is fine. I mean, I think it's healthy for everybody because we used to go through the whole process, bring them in, and then give them a test, and that takes not only we're trying to be considerate of our time, but as well as the candidate's time, right? If it's not going to be a fit, I think everybody's happy to just do more of a an online test, and then that way time saved, right?
Right.
So we move forward from the from the online test. We'll have a technical interview, and then we'll move to an in-person interview where the actual team that's going to be working with that person is part of the interview. Maybe not all the team members, but many of them. And we give them a pretty strong voice in terms of whether that person gets hired or not. And all the while, we'll actually go back through at that last interview stage and rank the person based on their ability to match our core values. So do we feel like that they are going to be, have that 100% integrity? That's kind of hard to figure out initially. But if there's been something along the way of the interview process that has led us to believe that they're not being honest with us, then that might be something to remove them from the candidacy. So
Right. No, it sounds good. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Waypoint. If you want to get your team aligned and you want to go from herding cats to a well-oiled machine, and if you're sick of the annual review process, then check out Waypoint. It's an elegant tool built for leaders just like you to help you invest in your people and unlock their true potential. Head over to waypointhq.com to learn more. So getting back to culture and one of the things that I did, I was actually pulled up the Glassdoor on Adage and read some of the reviews, and you're like 100% approve of the CEO. So you guys are just rocking the Glassdoor reviews. But one of the comments was that upper management is engaged in day to day. They said the upper management is very engaged in day to day and giving feedback. How do you do that? I mean, is that do you make a solid commitment to do that? Is it innate in your business that you're more engaged in the day to day? Because I mean, that's one of the things that people say they don't like, is that the management is not engaged in day to day and they're just like removed from most of the employees. So if you could speak to that.
yeah, I'm not sure how to interpret that person's comment, but one thing I try to do, and I know that the other leadership team members do, is we don't live in our ivory castle. I mean, we do have offices, of course, but we don't. We try to get and occasionally sit down and have lunch. Something else I'll do is after someone gets hired after 45 days, I take them out to coffee and I sit down and I talk with them and say, hey, are you doing the job we hired you for? Is this what you expected? And sometimes they have some feedback around that, or everything's great. But we just chat about them too. I like to learn about who they are and where they're from. And the other thing we do, even the day when they get hired, is we bring them out to lunch and we sit down and we focus more about them and just seeing how what type of person they are and what they're interested in. And I know that again, my other leadership team members do. So from a day-to-day, I uncover things in the process of that, right? So I'm like, hey, what are you working on? When I run people in the kitchen, what project are you working on? How are you doing? What's interesting about the project? That type of stuff. So maybe that's what they mean. I'm not sure. So, but I definitely do not want to be a micromanager. Try not to do that, and I know that the other leadership team members don't either. The point is to hopefully make them as autonomous as possible, but with as much oversight. There's always that balancing act, right?
Right. Has that been hard to adjust to as you guys have grown? I mean, has that been something that you got removed from the day-to-day and didn't really know what was going on? You had to re-engage, or the management team maybe struggled with micromanagement early on? I mean, would you give anyone tips that maybe is in that growing stage to how they can appropriately do that?
Yeah, I think there's in terms of organizations, one thing that I've learned is that you do hit this milestone of 50 to 75 people, and I've had this validated by a number of different sort of more senior business people than myself, and it's a place where a lot of firms struggle to get past, because you do need to introduce a new layer of management in there. And I hesitate to call it management because it's sometimes not a good word for people. But you do need to have people. You start out and you become that voice and you're very connected to the business. And then you do have to abstract away a bit just so you can get other things done. and it's difficult. So you have to learn that the communication flow has to go from leadership to management down to staff, and it needs to be planned out and thought out. And that was probably one of the biggest things that I've had to learn is I just can't think something and everyone should understand it, right?
Right.
And it should be vetted by the managers, and then have the employees just be able to understand it better based on some of the feedback that I get from the managers, because maybe it's not clear, maybe it wasn't, maybe it's too harsh, maybe it's just not well thought out, that type of thing. So figuring out that communication flow, living by it, making sure that we're doing our checkdowns, and again, communicating often. That's the other thing I learned as part of it. You can't communicate it enough. It's just by me standing up on Monday, we have a Monday morning status meeting, just by me or somebody else standing up on a Monday morning saying, hey, this is what we're going to do once, does not mean that it's sunk in. In fact, it probably hasn't reached, it's probably reached less than 10% of the audience at the time, because it's Monday morning and they're not really fully into work yet. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think that's a good point. That's an easy trap to fall into, and you don't even know the ramifications of it if you're not. If you're under communicating, then it just snowballs into something negative.
Yes, exactly.
So another one of the comments was that it's a very challenging environment, which is actually listed as a con, and it said it's hard, but it brings out the best, and it actually could be seen as a pro, is what this person said. And so I was wondering if you could expand upon that, of how you foster a challenging environment, which it sounds like you're pushing people a little bit outside of their comfort zone, and that certain people appreciate that. But have you run into struggles with that, or how do you guys manage that?
So we're in technology, one, right? As well as the fact that we are consulting. So at the end of the day, we're consultants, right? We build cool websites for companies around, or I should say organizations around the country, in fact, internationally in some cases too. And every situation's a little different. We try to keep things the same in terms of the tool sets and the frameworks that we're using and stuff like that, and the technology stack. But there's always something coming out, and we have to stay on top of it. So I think that that's part of the challenging part of it. The other thing is our customers, they rely on us to provide them technology direction and provide them with high quality solutions. And sometimes the pace at which we need to move and they're moving aren't in sync, and so crunch time comes on us to make sure that we're meeting delivery timelines. So that can be challenging. So you're jumping from one environment to a different environment, and different set of business rules and requirements between organizations. So I think that that's what the person meant by challenging. Consulting, you have to be adaptable, and that's actually one of our core values. So I'll throw that out there. It's adapt and evolve. So you need to adapt to what's happening. We cannot be stagnant. We constantly have to be learning here. If you want to just work on the same thing every day for day in, day out, and not learn new things, then it's not the right place for you, because we have to be able to do that in order to better serve our customers every day.
Yeah, that's great. So kind of in closing, I want to ask you two questions. One is, what do you think of, what are things that you've tried that haven't worked, that you think maybe are pitfalls of companies that are trying to build, positive company culture, or engage people? Are there any things that maybe you've tried that haven't worked, or things that maybe you screwed up and then you fixed later?
That's a good question. I think soliciting feedback too much can be a dangerous place to go. I think you have to do it in meaningful and I should say timed. Like we talked about earlier, going too frequent on this can end up getting you in a place where you're just constantly in a cycle of not making everybody happy, and that can be pretty tough mentally. So I think you have to sort of set the schedule and say, hey, once a year we're going to do this. This is going to be the schedule. We're going to do our survey. We're going to take the results. We're going to see what action items we can take on it. We're going to act on those action items. We're going to report back to on how we're doing throughout the year, and then come the next cycle, we can work on that again. And that would probably be one of the things that I think we've struggled with in the past, is how to make that consistent and not get too bogged down in too many details and too much frequency and soliciting feedback.
Yeah, that's great. The second question would be...
Oh, and by the way, suggestion box don't work.
Don't work, yeah. So just putting the blanket suggestion box out there does not work, huh?
No, we tried that. It didn't work.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good idea, but it didn't. It didn't seem to pay off.
So do you guys do anonymous feedback or not?
Yeah, I think. Well, today you get it through things like Glassdoor, which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
So you get that. We and then the employee surveys are anonymous. I don't know when they put comments in there. I couldn't tell you who wrote it. I can take guesses, but that's another thing I guess is a good point to make is don't kill yourself trying to figure out who's making what comments and why, because you've asked them to give you feedback. So just take it for what it is. Don't take it personally, because it's hard not to sometimes.
Yeah.
Because you're trying every day and you think you're doing all the right things, and then someone gives you a completely opposite opinion or aspect to it. So that's another piece I'd probably point out is just stay away from don't try and figure out who gave you what feedback. Just take it for what it is and act on it in the best you can.
Yeah. What would you say is like the quickest win that someone could, like tactic or something that someone could change to positively impact their company culture?
So there's two things I think that we've recently done, and that's the core values. Again, I'll go back to that. I really feel like defining and putting those down can really help to solidify who you are and what you are as an organization. The next step is to search for your why. What is your why? I don't know if you're a Simon Sinek fan at all, but I am. And after reading Start With Why, I kept noodling that. It took me a year or two to kind of really come down to it, and it does mean something to people. It's like having some sort of purpose. It's not everything, but it helps to sort of solidify again the direction and path you want to take the organization, and see who wants to follow. Because if someone's not about that stuff, then at least they can self-select out, and you don't have to figure that out 6 months later or 3 months later.
So does that feed your core values, or do you guys have a separate vision why statement that you got out of that?
I think the core values fed the why. I would start with the core values and go to the why. And so the core values, our why is 100% integrity and delivering success. So that's our why, and the core it emanated out of the core values.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to share?
No, thanks for having me, though. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your audience, and it's an honor, if you will. So thank you very much, and I hopefully I've helped anybody out there with some of the things they're struggling with, because Lord knows I think I've seen a few things myself.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found the show valuable, please give us some love on iTunes. But if there's any reason that you would rate us less than 5 stars, please let me know. Shoot me a note at mike@bestplacetoworkpodcast.com. Thanks.